the United States and China pledging further cooperation on climate change. China's emissions are growing rapidly. New cities, new buildings, new infrastructure is a really tough ask. The international countries did not come together to raise the $100 billion. So it was an important development to see the United States and China, who are the world's two largest emitters of climate change and the world's two largest economies, coming together and pledging further cooperation on climate change. I must say it pledged cooperation. I think it is a good starting point or a good starting point for the current administration to move forward. It needs to be aggressively put in place. So we do need to see much further engagement between the two countries. We need to see more concrete pledges, for example, on methane reductions. As I said, China's emissions are growing rapidly, and China has pledged to peak its emissions before 2030. In order for us to meet the global temperature, the internationally agreed global temperature rise agreed in the Paris Agreement of about aim towards 1.5 degrees, all countries need to move further and faster, and that includes China. So I think many countries are hoping that within the next few years, China will make a more definitive date in when it will peak its emissions. So in, let's say, 2027 would be great, or 2025. But China isn't off the hook. I mean, in terms of it still has an energy sector that is highly dependent on coal, and coal is the most polluting of the fossil fuels. It produces the most amount of CO2 per unit of energy. But it's also a big socio-economic question in terms of the employment that it provides. Millions of people within China are employed in the coal sector in terms of the mining, the transportation, the processing, the use of coal. So it isn't a simple question, but is absolutely fundamental. So I'd say firstly coal. I think the second issue is probably urbanization, and China, as other countries in its position, is still undergoing quite rapid urbanization, and that involves large-scale construction. So how do we construct new cities, new buildings, new infrastructure producing less carbon dioxide? And also, how do we construct these cities so that during their operation they are much more sustainable, so that we build in the opportunity for more public vehicles, less individual car use? How do we make the buildings more efficient? How do we make the whole system function in a way that requires less energy? So I think those are two. And then third, we cannot forget agriculture. Agriculture is responsible for around a quarter to a third of global emissions. And so we will need to change agricultural practice and address the way in which we manage land. I mean, I think putting a price on carbon is a mechanism in which we can accelerate the phase out of fossil fuels. Sorry, but it's not the only mechanism. And I'm not someone who believes that pricing will sort out all of the problems, but I think the importance in terms of international cooperation is for countries and companies to understand the process by which a country or region is introducing pricing, for there to be transparency about what that means for the import of goods, so that it enables countries to adjust their own production so that the tariffs don't have are not expected. In some countries, in the case of China, by 2060, is a really tough ask. I mean, we are asking to restructure the global economy within a few decades. And I think that will create really significant challenges. We can see in some areas how this will be done. For example, in terms of electricity, as we've talked about, in terms of wind and solar. We see a bit in terms of the electrification of transport with EVs. We can see how this can go ahead. Other areas it's more complicated, as we've discussed, in terms of food and farming, how we shift that, how we reduce methane emissions, will require significant changes in practice and potentially and probably most likely changes in diet. So we have to take the public with us. And that is for people in developed countries, developing countries, transitional countries. We all need to accept that we will have to change our behaviour, our consumption patterns, if we are to reach global targets. So it really is all countries working together in probably the greatest challenge the world has ever faced. And it's very clear that in terms of the developing countries, they need assistance in order to meet their climate change objectives. And that assistance can be financial. And this was one of the things that was really lacking at COP26, that international countries did not come together sufficiently to raise the $100 billion that was pledged for developing countries in terms of their climate change objectives.